Hi everybody. Kind of chuckling to myself because I'm sitting here realizing that it's taken me a lot longer than it usually does to recalibrate with some breathing and to just get that calm state that I like to feel before I start the videos. And I'm realizing that it's the coffee that I had this morning, and I don't drink coffee regularly anymore. At most, it's about once a week. I had it today because it's the last weekend before I start a fast, and I guess I wanted to be a little indulgent with my last weekend of food and things like coffee. So I'm feeling like a little jittery. I don't love how I feel, and so it's funny how this kind of ties into the topic for today. Which is transparency and self-compassion as a path to sovereignty. And I'm looking at I'm being self-transparent and looking at my choice to drink the coffee this morning, knowing what I do. And, why did I make that choice? So the self-compassion aspect of that would be that I'm not getting down on myself about it, and I'm just looking at it how did I come to that decision? I already know that I don't love how I feel on coffee, but definitely I do experience something I like about it, the stimulation factor. But it's always a little too much for me, and maybe that's kind of new for me. Because my diet has been really, really clean for the last 2 weeks. I've been gearing up to start this fast, and I really wanted to just be starting it off on the right foot. So yeah, the coffee was not the best idea, but anyway, everything I'm talking about today, I am going to be reading from my notes. They were just kind of pouring out of me this morning after I took a shower. I love those shower epiphanies where something just will come to me and I'll just have to go spill it out on paper. And it's usually just a more refined grasp on something mentally. So what came to me today was how it's the process of learning to not be judgmental and to not be overly critical of yourself that opens the door to being able to see the destructive programs that are still lingering, even if you've done a lot of spiritual work or a lot of detaching from bad influences or whatever. It's a learning process, and it does take practice. At least it did for me. Practice being in observer mode and being self-compassionate when we detour from the path, like when we make choices that go against our higher wisdom. When we're able to observe ourselves and allow ourselves to see the low awareness or low compassion choices that we have made. When we're just being transparent with looking at the inner functioning that manifests as decisions. When we look at this and we don't judge it or overly criticize, we get skilled at observing the mistakes with the neutrality of kind of an outside perspective. And also with the curiosity of a student who is learning how the mind kind of has a mind of its own. We can see our truth of what's going on without the fear of what meaning might be attached to that. What it means about who we are. So in the absence of self-criticism and judgment, the remaining sneaky programs surface into awareness. And when this happens and we have our neutrality, with neutrality there's clarity, and with clarity there is the ability to change. And with the balance of emotions that come from the standpoint of neutrality, the neutrality of observer mode, that really helps to balance the emotions. So it's all about a multifaceted state of balance and awareness. This is where we also bring in the compassion, while we're seeing and acknowledging and accepting these dirty secrets or distorted aspects of ourselves, which they're not rooted in our true spiritual essence, but they're rooted in the trauma and interference that we've experienced. They're rooted in the toxic environment that we grow up in, and they're rooted in the still somewhat mysterious responses that human beings have to the trauma and the interference. Ooh, that hurt. Yeah, that that was not cool. We don't like looking at our messes. We don't like looking at our aspects that are less easy to align, like our addictions and the choices that go against our core essence, our ignorance, our denials, our unmet fear. We like to get comfortable and create a new bubble. We like to feel as though ascension has been completed simply because we woke up, or simply because we live with intention, or simply because we, eat vegetarian or vegan. And maybe it's just me, but it feels like the process of cleaning out the shadow, this is not a single task or a single event. It's not a dark night of the soul, but it's an ongoing way of life, every day, and without a discernible ending point. And whether that's true or not, it feels that the intention in cleaning the shadow is only on par when the outlook is to have that full acceptance that it's okay if it does take my entire lifetime, and I still might not be finished in cleaning out the shadow, that there is no discernible end point, that there is no carrot. It's cleaning out the shadow is a way of life. It's a layer of intention within many layers, that ideally are harmonized with and guided by the spirit. So about my personal transparency experiences, and this is confession time. I had to look at the fact that I started smoking cigarettes again recently, after well over a year without a single cigarette, and without missing it, without feeling deprived at all, with feeling very, very happy about the choice and being relieved of the addiction, and could feel that my lungs had healed. And so looking at that, how I just let all of that awareness and higher wisdom, I just flicked it off my field of concern. And how do I do something like that? Because it's really one of my kind of core just modalities of living, to be in awareness and to always be looking to purify stuff that isn't supposed to be part of my makeup. So when I do self-destructive things and make these choices that go against my higher judgment, I have to look at that. How did I come to doing that? How did I tell myself a story that it would be okay to start smoking again? And I probably lied to myself that I would just be able to quit when I got back from the trip that I went on when I started smoking. And it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be when I got back. I just started giving myself excuses for why I needed to keep buying more cigarettes, to keep delaying the experience of quitting and getting off the nicotine, which for me is usually about a 3-day period of a mood fluctuation of one kind or another. Sometimes it makes me very depressed, and sometimes it just makes me very irritable. I don't really know what determines the difference in that, but in any case, it propels me into a state of imbalance, and there is a period of recovery that doesn't feel good. So, delaying that and avoiding that has definitely been behind continuing to smoke after the influence that, triggered it to start up again wasn't even in my environment. So, looking at how I made that choice to start smoking again so flippantly and without real understanding of what I was giving up as far as the accomplishment I already had in quitting for over a year. But also not judging myself at the same time, not looking at this as like, oh, see, you're so weak, see, you're always going to be a smoker, you make these bad choices, like, who do you think you are, trying to tell people about natural health, smoker. So, I used to do that kind of thing when I would be smoking. I would get really down on myself, and I would always be thinking about, gosh, I'm giving myself cancer, and I would just fill my head with the negative thoughts about it without changing anything. So what is the purpose in all that criticism and judgment and self-loathing if it doesn't lead me to changing anything? It just leads me further into self-loathing, which takes you away from the place of being able to affect change. So, yeah. Another thing that I needed to be transparent with myself about was looking at how I still consumed eggs and cheese, even though I have very strong objections to the dairy industry and to the abuse of animals, and I know that I don't want to put that stuff in my body. So looking at why would I still be consuming these things? Is this really a choice that I'm making with clarity, or is this a choice that I'm letting myself do less consciously than I deal with other things in my life? Is this a way that I'm allowing my own denial because I have mild addictions to what is it that's in cheese? I can't think of the name of it, but something in cheese is addictive. Watch the documentary that is on Netflix called What the Health. It's wonderful. 5 stars for me anyway. And watching that recently is also what stirred this up for me, is looking at that choice that I've been vegetarian for a long time now. A long time, about 18 months. And I love that choice. So why didn't I go all the way with removing all the animal products? What was I telling myself that was still okay about the way that cows and chickens are treated? So yeah, that's kind of a shadow thing, that I still would have these little vulnerabilities to choosing to participate in things that go against my better judgment. And that is in essence cleaning out the shadow. I had to look at what scary things I still avoided out of fear and not out of real choice. Something like participating in community events. I don't think there's anything wrong with living kind of a hermit life, but I think that you do miss out on a lot, and that when you change your perspective about things like a social situation like an arts festival or something, and you have a new perspective where you go expecting just wholesome human connection and discovery and fun, then chances are you will find that. It's not so much about having a false idea or a false anxiety about social situations. Or maybe it is, but it's very subtle. Maybe it's just a little story that I tell myself, that like I would rather not attend these community events because of all the hassle that you have to go through and how that kind of drains my energy, and I just would rather do other things. it's just looking at that. I guess that's one example where I don't really see too clearly if I am in denial about anything. Because when I do want to go do something that's in a social environment, I just go do it, and there's really no nervousness about it. So in one sense, I do feel like I'm moving toward a really healthy balance of participating in the things that I do want in my life, and not avoiding things out of fear, but avoiding them out of better judgment. And I don't care so much what people think of me, but when, like, the fear from social situations in the past came from when I would slip up or fall short of just my personal standards for myself, which used to be just ridiculous. In that they were about perfection, and that anything that fell short of that was, it just really would bother me. And that was a terrible way to live. But what would happen in social situations is that when I would kind of make a mistake, I would project criticisms onto myself from other people. And I think that this came from lingering childhood programs that make me want to instill that low self-worth, that sense of low self-worth that's still lingering. Like the lingering virus or program or whatever you want to call it, just, to understand the concept, it wants to keep that low self-worth because that serves it. That keeps me in fear, and it keeps me from never changing anything or trying. It takes advantage of any signal from the environment, whether misperceived or otherwise. It takes advantage of that, and it starts running that toxic narrative. And the fear was, my fear was that I would be exposing myself to other people's criticisms and the undeniable evidence that I had a low worth. And I don't know if other people get this when I talk about stuff like this, because it sounds like such a pity party, but it was a very deeply ingrained program. And even though I cleaned out the bulk of it, I realized that it could still be triggered sometimes because old emotions that were not yet fully healed were triggered. And it was also accessing old, buried in the shadow, inner narratives of my own uselessness. If these things are developed in childhood, then they are deep in there, and they are kind of part of the it's not the core of who you are, but more of the core of the schematic of the persona. Those distorted perceptions received in childhood, such as low self-worth, the whole adulthood afterward is built on that distortion. So it's definitely deep in the shadow to be cleaned. And I think the depth of my emotion with regard to this, being triggered of that old narrative of low self-worth, I think that part of me is still grieving the old beliefs, the old reality that I believed in, that, I got a lot of it from religion and, obviously from my parents. These old beliefs, they were very comforting. They were blissfully ignorant. The old narrative gave virtue to my upbringing, to my reality, to my country, to my education, to my life path, the way that it was before. Until it didn't, until the narrative wasn't giving virtue to those things. And so that is what woke me up, was seeing how what I really felt on the inside wasn't matching the overlaying story about what was happening to me, or what was happening in the world for that matter. Waking up to so many things being false, and so many things being instituted as a way to undermine and control us. It's very sad. You know, everything you believe in crumbling feels like, you know, a disaster or a death. And so this is likely what makes the unknown so terrifying for most people. They don't know sovereignty. They only know fear and dependence and trauma and addiction. Letting an old belief paradigm crumble, it does feel like a death, and it is, but it's also a birth of something far greater and far more authentic. After growing up in this conditioning, it takes unprecedented courage to self-direct. And such a thing is not even imaginable for most people. But the courage to self-direct is nurtured as we embrace the deeper intention to observe our own programming without judgment. We see that the scary parts of us are not nearly as terrible as we feared, and that they are not who we are, rather they are responses to trauma, disconnection, and a toxic environment. And these wounds in the shadow can be healed and released. And it's not about blaming, but rising above the system. Giving our energy to the solutions and to restoration of wholeness, not empowering the opposition with a different kind of destructive emotional energy, not trading in fear for hate or anger or divisiveness. Through practicing self-transparency and observer mode awareness, we learn about ourselves and we come to authentically love and accept ourselves. We reconnect with our purest virtues and intentions, and we reconnect with who we truly are. We have to deprogram ourselves to fully embrace the authentic self, to engage the full empowerment of sovereignty. The mind has to be free from interference and false attachments. This is achieved in practicing observer mode on yourself, holding transparency and self-compassion as equally paramount priorities. So I don't judge or overly criticize myself for starting up an old bad habit or falling short of my personal standards. I allow myself to observe it with honesty and neutrality as information to be accounted for in the purification process. If I don't let myself see the programs in the shadows, my purification is only an idea, and my mental sanitation is still corrupted in the most hidden ways. If I let myself look at my shadow aspects, but I give my mental energy to writing an inner narrative of weakness, or maybe even a narrative that denies my responsibility and contribution in the matter, then I've signed on for an exercise in regression. It takes both transparency and compassion to transmute what we find in the shadow. It is a matter of choice. When we don't choose sovereignty, we indirectly invite ourselves into a fear-based dependence on a false reality. Thank you.